Hello, students. I am Jason Hamlin. I am an instructor here at WSU, and I am excited to have this episode of the podcast for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are in the COLAB here at WSU Tech. ITAS has arranged for us to have this studio for the podcast, and so I am really excited to have these facilities and these wonderful people to work with here, and so thank them for that. The second reason I'm excited is we have Cade Hesslink here with us. I'm very excited about this. Cade is a cost accountant over at Koch Capabilities. He's a senior accountant, and he and I worked together back in our Boeing days, and we actually, most recently, we were on Spirit Defense together, and we talked about a lot of cost accounting problems and solved a lot of things in the real world. And so, Cade, super excited for you to be here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's just start there. As far as cost accounting goes, right?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of drew you to this? Because you didn't come as a cost accountant at first when you were at Spirit. Tell me about that. What drew you to cost accounting?
Yeah, so I think I got into cost accounting in a little bit of a non-traditional way, right? I started my career at Spirit on the assembly line, just working as a mechanic. And then from there, I got a job in audit almost by accident, right? That's where I got my first job. And then from there, I kind of started to get more interested in internal controls and accounting. And so from there, I kind of followed you over to the defense accounting space. And that's where I got my first taste of cost accounting. And I'd say I kind of learned how to be a cost accountant or learned how cost accounting works the only real way there is to do it, which is by being pretty bad at it for a while, in a persistent way. I didn't just show up on Monday and break something. I showed up the rest of the week and kind of did the same thing. But I think that's kind of the only way, or at least the best way, really, especially in a modern company with these complex ERP systems and really complicated accounting systems, to actually understand how these function and be able to take them apart and kind of see what's underneath of how do these systems actually flow through.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you several times, having a problem, and it was something that, we needed to solve, but we didn't really have a way to do it. There's a curiosity that was kind of necessary there. Talk about that. How did that motivate you?
Yeah. No, see, I look at it, these complex ERP systems we have, like any sort of complex, tangible object, almost like an engine, right? If you're going to actually understand how this works, you need to not be as scared to take this apart and kind of see what's underneath it. If you don't understand how a process works or, why a component is there, and take it off, you'll probably, figure it out. So I think it's always never accepting of, hey, we push that button because the instructions tell us to. It's day 3 of close. That's why we push the button. But why? What does it do? So I think it's always trying to understand that, unpacking that, following the string on it, and being able to tell you, what is the system actually doing? Because that's something we take for granted a lot with these automated ERP systems. It'll do a lot of the work for you, and it'll kind of lull you to sleep. You won't really understand your accounting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that reflection. And then I am interested in kind of what was an experience that you had early on where there was something really hard. Let's talk specifically when you didn't have your head around it and then you made your way through it. Can you tell me about a time that happened for you?
Yeah. I think the general flow of learning how overheads can work, in one of these modern ERP systems can be something that's really hard to get your head around, especially transitioning from what you learn in a cost accounting class, where you're learning a lot of the fundamentals of, this is you have indirect cost and you have a base, and this is fundamentally what is happening. But then I think you need to consider, in a modern accounting system, you're not doing this on hand. You're not doing this by hand. It's not a worksheet in a textbook. You have to understand the parameters that are loaded within your SAP system or Oracle system. And that's kind of the modern transition of, in a previous life, cost accountants were creating this data. That was the value that they provided. They were taking time cards or, machine reports and putting out, efficiency statements and stuff like that. But now we're interpreting the data and being able to understand the work the ERP system is doing for us. So I think making that just kind of like logical leap of what's my role here? I'm not here to create ratios or, anything like that. You're here to interpret the ERP system's data and being able to understand what it's doing for you.
Yeah. I think the waterfall is a really good example because the other thing that you get to experience going through that is the importance lands because there are stakeholders. There are people that care about what goes into the base and what comes out of the base,
Right.
and there's compliance implications and all of that. Tell me about how the stakeholders responded to some of the work
Uh,
with the overheads.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that's the biggest thing people will kind of be surprised in. If you're stepping into one of those roles, one of the quickest ways to add value is being one of the few people that's able to reach inside of an ERP system and communicate to those stakeholders. What are the bases actually loaded? We all conceptually understand, what the base might be for material burden, but go actually pull, the cost elements or the GL accounts out of the ERP system and being able to quantify it in that way. So I think, as a first step to being able to provide value, if you're somebody new stepping into a cost accounting role, just being able to understand those little things like that, that's one of the easiest way to provide values to stakeholders.
Yeah, and you can't really be afraid to ask a question,
Right.
right? You have to just put yourself out there every once in a while,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep. I think that's probably the biggest thing of there's no a lot of these systems are so customizable, so you can Google if you're working with Oracle or SAP, you might be able to, Google a few things, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to utilize the network within your workspace and not be afraid to feel kind of dumb with a lot of the questions that you're asking. And that's just part of the learning process and something you're going to have to get used to of firing off a lot of emails, walking to a lot of desks, and just asking, "Well, how does this work? I don't understand even a little bit." Start from the top.
And then you do enough of that and enough of that, and
Uh-huh.
suddenly now you're the one that knows things,
Right,
right? That's how you
right.
build that. That's
Uh-huh.
very good.
Yep.
So then now let's think about, you've been through cost accounting class yourself. You mentioned it, right?
Mm.
And there's a lot of, kind of neat things we learn about allocating indirect costs, for example, like you were talking about. You get out into the real world. What can students be thinking about that are actually in the middle of class and you're trying to get past this class, but are there things that you can take out of that would actually help when you get into an actual cost accounting
Mhm.
role?
So I think it's less focused on memorizing, whatever your textbook is classifying as indirect versus direct costs. Um, Memorizing the different methodologies that you could use to provide, to allocate overhead, and more just with those examples that you're provided with, understanding how they work, understanding how cost actually flows through even a modeled out accounting system is because at the end of the day, that's the true value you're going to be able to provide when you're in a cost accounting role. So if you can just kind of pressure test that as much as you can as a student of, don't just take the example and, memorize the highlights of it. Think about, okay, well, what if I changed this pool? What if I changed this base? How does that change my output? Those are the real answers that you'll need to provide value on the other side in a cost accounting role.
Okay, so let's change gears here a little bit. I want to hear you're at Koch Capabilities, right?
Right.
And we talked a little bit about this before we started today. You get the opportunity to use some pretty neat tools,
Mm.
and you're getting to see sort of the forefront of kind of where AI is going. Can you tell me some of the things that you're seeing and how
Mhm.
interesting that is to work with?
Yeah. Yeah. So the biggest thing with AI is just the potential to drastically change all of our workflows that we use on a daily basis. So if you think of anything that you think takes your time and is not necessarily value add from a human component of this doesn't necessarily need my knowledge. I know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of clicking through on the buttons here. This is all stuff that AI has been able to be a dramatic time saver. And I think right now we're just in the tip of the learning of how can we effectively harness this to be able to be value add to us. So my encouragement to students would be to just play with it as much as you can. Whether that's 15 minutes a day, how can I make my general life easier? Or how can, I make my school calendar more efficient? Those things, that's all what we're trying to do in the workplace right now to be able to make AI work better for us. So I would think if you would do that, then you'd be in a pretty good place to come into the workplace and just kind of ride that wave with what we're doing right now.
So in other words, it would be good for students to just take a dip in the water, right?
Right.
And try it. And we try in our courses to get past that cheating stigma that is in academia and really into trying to add value. So how do you add value to your student experience?
Right.
Right? There's
Yeah.
ways to do it just like you're using it at Koch.
No, exactly. Yeah, I would just encourage people to get themselves as familiar with it as possible because it's going to be a tool that is not going to go away. And I know a lot of people are worried about the potential of it, taking their jobs. But I think one of the things that we've all kind of been encouraged with is, it's not the only people who could be left behind are the ones who refuse to harness its capability. Similar to if you were a cost accountant who, refused to pick up SAP or Oracle. These are all tools that are going to make our lives more efficient and more valuable. You just have to become an effective user.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So I guess the next thing, probably the last thing I'll ask is if you have any tips. We've got students that are senior level students. They're about to graduate. What kind of advice, you recently graduated from Wichita State, what kind of advice, not just in the cost accounting realm, but as students, what things can they be doing now to really put themselves in position to either get the job they want or get the promotion they want or whatever their goals are? Give us a little bit of, from your view, you've gotten hired into a good job at Koch, you're a WSU grad. What's your advice?
I would say the biggest thing right now is making sure that you're not just coming with a set of hard skills. You don't just have a fluent understanding of cost accounting, financial accounting, being able to work with ERP systems, but you're also able to effectively interact with teams and people. So with that, can you collaborate effectively? And I think a good test of that would be reaching out to people within your network, recent grads who've been at places 1 to 2 years, other people that you've interned with. If the job's out there that you want, I think you should try to network within that company and try to, whether that's meeting somebody for coffee or just, a quick exchange on LinkedIn of, hey, what are the skills that I would need to build to be able to succeed in this position? Things like that, just kind of working your network.
Mm-hmm. And people are happy to answer those questions, right? You ask somebody, yes.
Exactly.
They love talking about it.
Yep.
And I think you said something interesting earlier about sending an email to a person, but then walking to people's desks. There's an interesting skill there too, right? Like, you don't want to be a person that's just sending emails and someone comes and asks you about it.
Yeah.
Say, well, I'm waiting on a response to the email. Well,
Yeah.
now walk to the desk. How do you develop that, right? Like that ability to really follow up on it.
Yeah. That's what I always tell people the first time, if you're interacting with somebody frequently, you should just go to their desk and actually meet them and watch the tone of the interaction change completely. If you actually make the effort to make a connection, and if you have that interaction face to face, one, you can probably get a more prompt answer, but two, you're actually building a relationship in the workplace. So I would just always suggest that as you build your network, whether that's at your internship or your first job, don't let, or now so many people communicate through email and Teams. You can get away with having all of your meetings on Teams nowadays. I would try to challenge you to purposely seek out in-person contact and try to build that network as much as possible.
Okay, so what have you been doing with your summer then?
It's a lot of playing with my dog, Amy Lou.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how we're passing the time these days.
Yeah, I saw the Odyssey a couple of weeks ago. That was kind of
The
incredible,
Odyssey's
right?
very good.
Yeah, saw it in IMAX.
You got to watch it in IMAX.
Just incredibly loud.
That's another recommendation I have for the students. See the Odyssey in IMAX.
Definitely worth your time.
Yes.
Yeah. Cade, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for coming on the pod.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate the invite.
All right.